So good morning, class. Today we're going to begin with the last topic before our prelim exams, and that is elasticity. So I invite you now to look at all of your handouts so that we can begin with some definitions. So first, what is elasticity? Now what we have is a rather highfalutin definition. It says that it is the responsiveness of demand or supply to a change in its determinants. So later, when we get to the different kinds of elasticity, I'm going to explain to you more about what responsiveness means. Because if you're not able to grasp the term, then you will have some difficulty understanding why the equation is such and why it's even important, okay? So let me just guide you through how we're going to talk about elasticity. First, we'll be talking about the elasticity of demand. And we will take up three kinds of elasticity. That's price elasticity of demand, income elasticity of demand, and cross elasticity of demand. But don't worry, because for today, we will only take up the first, price elasticity of demand. And after we wrap up everything about demand, then we'll move on to price elasticity of supply. Okay? So, what is the first kind of elasticity of demand? As mentioned, it is price elasticity. It's a percentage change in quantity for a percentage change in price. Now let's compare that with the definition of elasticity in general. Elasticity is responsiveness of demand, in this case, to a change in its determinants. And price elasticity is a percentage change in quantity, that's quantity demanded, for a percentage change in price. So what exactly do we mean by responsiveness? What we're looking at is cause and effect. When we talk about price elasticity, we're looking at the responsiveness of quantity demanded, in this case, right? We'll also have price elasticity of supply later on. Given a change in its determinants, and for price elasticity, that determinant is a change in price. Now let me clarify to you that when we talk about price elasticity of demand, let's assume that we're looking at price elasticity of this whiteboard marker. Again, we're looking at the responsiveness or how much quantity demanded of this marker will change when the price of this marker changes. Now, notice that I am emphasizing this marker's quantity demanded given this marker's change in price. Why? Because when we go to other kinds of elasticity of demand, for example, cross elasticity of demand, you will notice that we're looking at quantity demanded of this marker given a change in something else's price, not in the price of this marker. Again, let's review. Price elasticity of demand for this marker is based on change in price of this marker. So when we talk about cause and effect, what is the cause? The cause is the first thing that happens, and the effect is what happens after the first thing that happens. What is the cause? Let me invite you, Miss Dizon. The cause here would be, would you say it is the change in price or the change in quantity?
Change in price.
Very good, okay? So the cause is the change in price, and then we look at the response or responsiveness. What happens to the change in quantity demanded when we change the price, okay? Now there are two ways for us to compute that. The first is using point elasticity, and the second is using arc elasticity. What's the difference between point and arc? If you have, in this case, we're looking at demand, so normally it's a downward sloping demand curve. A point elasticity would just be elasticity at a given point, okay? While arc elasticity would be the elasticity between 2 points, and as you can see, we're computing basically the arc, okay? So let's move on quickly through the other definitions, although I'll be building up on them more when we get to that particular topic. Income elasticity of demand is the second kind of elasticity of demand that we'll be taking up next meeting. Income elasticity this time is defined as a percentage change in quantity demanded for a percentage change in income. Compare this to the definition of price elasticity, percentage change in quantity demanded for a percentage change in price. So this time, we are looking at income as the cause, and then what is the effect on quantity demanded when you change income? So income, cause, quantity demanded still is the response. Finally, the third and last kind of elasticity of demand that we'll be taking up this semester is cross-elasticity, defined as the percentage change in quantity demanded of one good when you compare it to a percentage change in the price of a related good. So you're still looking at price and its effect on quantity demanded, but this time, it's no longer the price of this good compared to the quantity demanded of the same good. Instead, you're looking at the price of something which we identify as a related good and the quantity demanded of this good. Now, what would we consider as a related good? It must be a good which will probably have an effect on this good that we are looking at. Now, if this is a whiteboard marker, would you say that a whiteboard is a related good?
Yes.
Yes, very good. Now, what kind of relation does the whiteboard have with a whiteboard marker? There are two possible kinds of relations that we will look at. The first is complementary, and the second is substitute. Is this a complementary good or a substitute good? It is a complementary good because you use it together. Whereas, if you compare, let's say, a whiteboard marker with a ball pen, perhaps you can consider them as substitute goods. Now, I don't want to get ahead of myself. I just want to make sure that you understand the difference between cross-elasticity and price elasticity, both of demand. We'll also need to know the definition of total revenue, which is simply, and you are accounting student, so you should not have a problem with this, right? The price of a good multiplied by the total quantity. So let's assume that this is priced at 15 pesos. If you have two goods, then you have the price 15 times the quantity of 2. Total revenue will be 30. For accountants, I think you call it as gross revenue, right? Before you remove all the taxes, all the cost of goods sold, etc. Now, we have inferior goods taken up last meeting, normal goods, and prestige goods, and substitute goods. We don't need to go into this now. I'll go through them when we get to cross-elasticity, okay? I mentioned complementary goods already, and group curve, I think we'll be better off taking that up again next meeting. So let's move on to today's lesson, price elasticity of demand. As mentioned, it's the degree of responsiveness of the quantity demanded to a change in price. And when we compute, basically, we divide the percentage change in quantity demanded by the percentage change in price. Now, there are certain factors that will affect elasticity, but perhaps it might be better for me to go through the equation first, and we'll revert back to this shortly. Okay, this is arc elasticity. And when we talk about arc elasticity, again, we measure the percentage change in quantity demanded for the percentage change in price. Now, how do we compute it? You measure the change in quantity. So, for example, you used to buy 10,000 and now you're buying 20,000 units. The change in quantity will be 10,000. Divided by, now this is rather unwieldy, you can just write it down as Q average. Basically, remember, we're looking at arc elasticity. We're looking at 2 points. And we said this is 10,000 and this is 20,000. So the first, the numerator will be 10,000. The second is actually the first figure, 10,000, plus the second figure, 20,000. So that's 30,000 divided by 2 or 15,000. Again, you can just mark this as Q average. Everything is divided by a change in price over price average. So you'll be computing this similarly to the way you computed this. So let's assume that the price changed from 10 to 20, in which case the change in price is 10. That's 20 minus 10. And the denominator will be the first price 10 plus the second price 20 or 30 divided by 2. Now let me caution you about some things. First, you must compute this entire thing and then compute this entire thing, so that you will be computing this divided by the total of this, okay? Also, when you're computing the average, you must make sure that you compute the bottom part as a whole. So don't do change in Q over Q1, and then whatever the answer is, that's when you add Q2 divided by 2. We'll go through some exercises shortly. Also, only for price elasticity, Okay, again, only for price elasticity. We'll be changing the rules when we get to income elasticity and cross elasticity. But for now, use only absolute values. What does that mean? You don't need to worry about which number comes first. Is it positive? Is it negative? It doesn't matter. So whether the change is from 10,000 to 20,000, which is positive, or from 20,000 to 10,000, which is negative, you will just put the change here as an absolute value. So it is 10,000. Don't worry about whether it's increasing or decreasing. The same is true for change in price. Everything in this equation is absolute values. Now, I'll just show you price elasticity, point elasticity, but you don't need to worry about it in the sense that we won't really be doing exercises about it. Why? Most of the time, when people compute elasticity of price, they look at arc elasticity. They find that it is more useful, okay? But you just need to know, and that's the reason why I'm bringing this out to you, you just need to be able to differentiate point elasticity from arc elasticity. So what's the difference? The numerators are the same, change in quantity and change in price, but look at the denominator. Instead of the average of quantity demanded and the average of price, what you need to look at is Q1 and P1. Now, what is Q1 and what is P1? I mentioned earlier that for point elasticity, basically you're just looking at one point along the demand curve. So if this is the point, you must compare it with an original point. The original point will be given to you, okay? So when you talk about change in Q, you're comparing the new point with whatever is the original point divided by the original point, okay? The same is true for price. There is a price related to this portion of the demand curve. So how much is this price different from the original price? By how much did it change? If the original price is 1 and the new price is 20, it changed by 19. Divided by the original price, which is 1. Okay? Questions so far? None? Are you sure? I've already covered quite a lot of things. Okay, let me just go through this quickly. Okay, no, you don't need that thing. Arc elasticity. All right. Now, as promised, I will now be discussing some factors that will affect price elasticity of demand. Now, remember that the definition of elasticity is how responsive, how much does quantity demanded change when we change the price of that good. Now, there are certain factors that will sort of help you already, even before you do the computations. It will give you an idea of whether or not something is elastic or inelastic. The first is substitutability. What does that mean? Whether or not the good has many substitutes. For example, let's look at this whiteboard marker. Is it a good that would have many substitutes? If we look at this particular brand of whiteboard marker, this is G-Soft. You just go to any bookstore or any school supply store and determine how many kinds of whiteboard markers, blue whiteboard markers, are available. You'll probably find that there are a good number of them. So we can say that this is a good that has many substitutes. Now, if this good has many substitutes, do you expect that quantity demanded will change a lot or very little if we change the price of this marker? I mentioned that this marker costs 15 pesos. What happens when I change the price to, let's say, 18 pesos? If there are many substitutes, is there a bigger chance or a smaller chance that people will buy the substitute good? Yes, very good. They will probably shift because there are many options to choose from. As compared, let's say, to a good that has very few substitutes. An example of this would be, anyone? What would you consider as something with very few or no substitutes? Medicine, right? Especially a particular kind of medicine. Let's say your doctor prescribes you a medicine for your diabetes. I hope that none of you have it, okay? But if the doctor prescribes you medicine for diabetes, Would you consider all the other medicines as substitutes? No. There is a particular kind of diabetic medicine and a particular brand that your doctor will recommend given your case history, right? And so, if the price of the diabetes medicine increases, let's say from 200 pesos to 250 pesos, that's a very big price increase, 25%. Do you think it will be just that easy for you to shift to the other diabetes medicines the way you easily shifted to other whiteboard markers? Probably not. So how do we describe this whiteboard marker versus the diabetes medicine? This whiteboard marker responded a lot to the change in price. So we would say that this whiteboard marker is highly elastic, while the diabetes medicine would be relatively inelastic. So when we talk about elasticity, try to imagine a rubber band, right? A rubber band is elastic or inelastic? Elastic. Now, what would you consider as inelastic? A rubber tire. A tire of a 10-wheeler truck, right? Have you ever tried to see if it is elastic? Have you tried to pull the sides of that rubber tire together? It's unlikely that you will make much progress. So whenever you think of elasticity, imagine a rubber band as being very elastic. It moves a lot versus a rubber tire, which will hardly be affected by any change, right? Okay. Second, proportion of income. Depending on how important or how basic a good is, how much of your income it takes up, it will probably be elastic or inelastic. So let's take the case of a middle-class family. I think here in Pampanga, the average family size is 4, at least 2 children, right? Okay, let's give this family an income of 20,000 a month. Now, of that 20,000 a month, where do you think the biggest portion of income is used for? Maybe food? Yes. And then after that, we have some utilities. After that, we have miscellaneous. Okay, so that's where you get your tuition, you get money for books, and you have some luxuries, right? You go to the movies every so often. So we're looking at a 20,000 monthly income. 10,000 of that goes to food. Let's allot 5,000 to utilities and another 5,000 to miscellaneous items. Let's assign percentages so that we can see the proportion of income. This is 50%, this is 25%, and this is 25%. Comparing food to the other items of income, food occupies the biggest proportion of income. If it occupies the biggest proportion of your income, do you expect it to be elastic or inelastic? So think about it first. Don't discuss with your classmates. Okay? And then I want to see a show of hands. So, if it occupies a big proportion of income, do you expect it to be elastic? How many think it's elastic? Do you expect it to be inelastic? Okay. The answer is that you would expect it to be elastic. Now, don't react first. I know that some of you are thinking, but food is a basic necessity, etc., etc. Don't confuse proportion of income with the other factors. We have luxury versus necessity here. Just look at it as a proportion of income. What is the logic behind proportion of something that occupies a big proportion of income being elastic? Because generally, if you have 20,000 a month and you are paying 10,000 for marketing and groceries, etc., you will probably be observing how much money you're using for food, as opposed to something that occupies a very small proportion of income. For example, how much money did you spend on your ball pen? That's a very small proportion of your income. Not even 1% of this 20,000, I hope, no? Unless you're using a very expensive brand of ball pen, right? So if it's a very small proportion of income, you're not watching out for it. You're not taking note of it. You have probably already forgotten how much you spent for that ball pen. But if it's very big, notice that your parents probably take note of it and notice fluctuations. For example, the electric bill. They probably are able to tell you what the average electric bill is, but they will not be able to tell you how much is the average amount used for books. It's too small a proportion of income. So that's the logic behind